Business School. Thank you everyone for joining in today. I know it's evening time in India and it's morning here, but I'm going to quickly introduce the panel and the panelists, and then I'm going to let you guys take the lead on this. Today, we are hosting CHROs from a diverse set of industries to discuss what is the future of work in India, especially in context of human capital development in the post-pandemic world. We have representation of members from leading consulting, IT, e-commerce, and pharma companies, and we will be deep diving into how the nature of work is changing in Indian companies coming out of the pandemic, how policy development is being influenced by this, and how senior leadership is addressing these emerging challenges. Today, we are joined by Ms. Sonali Misra, the VP Talent and Head HR of Bain & Company India. She is the organization's HR. She has led the organization's HR operations for over a decade and works closely with the Bain India leadership team to develop and implement people strategies in this leading consulting firm. She led the team during India's COVID-19 lockdown and helped evolve the firm's operating models during this period of disruption. The measures undertaken and her perspectives on the evolving nature of work in the consulting domain has been covered by major news outlets in the country. She is passionate about increasing opportunities for women in the workforce and the potential of the future of work to be more inclusive to this demographic. Mr. Krish Shankar is an executive VP and group head of human resource development at Infosys. Infosys is an Indian multinational IT company that provides business consulting, IT, and outsourcing services. It's the second largest Indian IT company with revenues over $13 billion. In his role, he is responsible for envisioning the roadmap for HR, driving strategy, and implementing the operational priorities of a company with more than 250,000 employees. Mr. Shankar has been with Infosys since 2015. Prior to joining Infosys, he was the head of HR for South Asia at Philips. He is also the author of Catalyze, Power Up Your People Ecosystem, a much acclaimed playbook on HR. Mr. Shanta Gupta is the CHRO of SunPharma Advanced Research Company. The company is a clinical stage biopharma company focused on improving standards of care for patients globally through innovation in therapeutics and delivery. 90% of its workforce is that of scientists. She joined the organization in 2020 amidst the pandemic and has been instrumental in aligning policies with the changes and requirements of the pharma industry due to the pandemic. She has over 28 years of experience in conceptualizing and aligning HR in line with business strategy and how it can enhance process efficiency, organizational effectiveness, and employee potential. In addition to the pharma industry, she has led organizational initiatives across manufacturing, infra, and the financial services domains. Mr. Krishna Raghavan has been Flipkart's Chief People Officer since March 2020. Flipkart is India's biggest e-commerce company and is partly acquired by Walmart. As the CPO and in the midst of the pandemic, Mr. Raghavan laid out Flipkart's commitment to being inclusive, entrepreneurial, and sustainable while focusing on employee experience. Prior to his current role, he has been the technology head for Flipkart's fulfillment and services and customer experience groups. In the course of his tenure at Flipkart, he has also spearheaded the launch of the marketplace platform and has led multiple strategic technology initiatives for eCart, a logistics subsidiary of Flipkart. Our moderator for this extremely distinguished panel is Professor Chandrasekhar Sripada. He is a professor of organizational behavior at the Indian School of Business, or ISB, and this is a role he has held since 2017. His current research interests are focused on leadership, talent, culture, and future of work in digital economies. Outside ISB, he sits on the board for non-for-profit companies and NGOs. Prior to teaching, Professor Chandra was a C-suite executive with large public, private, and MNC firms and held the role of CHRO for more than 25 years. His experience includes the role of President and Global Head of HR at Dr. Reddy's Laboratories and VP and CHRO of South Asia at IBM. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Professor Sripada, to commence the discussion. And I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suvarna. You can hear me, no? Clearly?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Thank you, Suvarna, and all those in the audience and the distinguished panelists. It's my privilege to join you all with this wonderful event that Columbia University students have organized. So what we want to do is to dive deep immediately into the topic. Just a few words in the beginning to set the stage. Future of work is a very big topic. And obviously, it's also a very, because it is future, it's anybody's guess as to what it is. So there are many things there. There's about how technology interfaces with human beings and work, how equities can be driven when work completely gets automated and jobs taken away. There are a number of interesting ethical and policy level questions that arise on the whole topic of future of work. But in current times, our focus about future of work has moved to one immediate issue which seems to be bothering all of us, which is about what will be the way people will work post-pandemic, which is during the 2 years of pandemic, they had the opportunity to go and work from anywhere or work from home. But now many companies are put together some very thoughtful programs called return to office. And in the midst of the two ends of the spectrum, so work from home to return to office, there are a number of other permutations, combinations that are emerging. And this whole phenomenon is unfolding. We do not know them. And the purpose of today's panel discussion is to actually pick the minds of leading practitioners to get some sense of this running trend and get some trend analysis, if you like, So we are not expecting to kind of say something very definitive, but we will certainly take some positions around it and take a look at it. And I'm sure every one of you will see it from your lens, from your experience, some partly driven by your position in your company and your experience, and some because of your thought leadership in the industry. So I will count on both of them, and we'll straight away jump into asking you questions, which we will wrap up in 45 minutes to 50 minutes time. And the order would be, as I said, random, which we will begin anywhere and go through all of you and come back to the same question. But I will certainly repeat the question in some form to each one of you, so that we want to see your perspective on this. So if I may begin with you, Sonali, what do you see is the trend in your types of organizations or in industry, as you see, about return to office? Are you letting people work remotely from homes, or are you insisting that they come back to office? Or are there hybrid formats of work that are getting settled down? I just wanted to understand your perspective on that.
Sure, Professor. So thank you. And, as we were discussing prior to the panel starting, in consulting, we are looking at a hybrid model as well. We've been completely remote for a large part of the pandemic, and eventually, started seeing impact on collaboration and also on culture, which, especially for a company like Bain, is key to our employee value proposition. And so, after a lot of thought with the leadership, we decided to create a few different archetypes based on what our clients need and how much of team co-location we need to be able to define whether a team should be coming to work, should be going to client site, or should be completely remote. So in that spectrum, we follow, different versions of what works best for our people and for our clients. So that's where we are right now.
So broadly a hybrid format, but it also includes situations where if client requires your people to go to clients' offices.
Absolutely. In a client servicing business,
it's no more.
Yes.
So it's partly client driven and not just the company policy. And that's an interesting dimension, work is being client driven is an interesting dimension. Traditionally, it was believed that how people should work is employer driven. And if client is the new stakeholder, which he was always, or he or she, but having to decide the fundamental issue of where to work from because of what client wants is an interesting new dimension you refer to. But we will sort of visit others and come back to explore these issues a little better. So if I may ask you, Krishna, Raghavan, how do you see this in Flipkart and e-commerce industry?
No, thanks for first of all inviting me to this panel discussion, and glad to be here. So I think at Flipkart, we have, again, similar to what Sonali mentioned, we have different types of functions, different type of roles. In fact, all through the pandemic, the supply chain employees have been working 24/7. So, through shifts, so that has remained unchanged for them, in fact, through the entire pandemic. So that continues. But for the folks who are not from supply chain, I think early in the pandemic, we actually started to put out a lot of continuous listening surveys to employees. And we also talked to a bunch of employees in very different functions, different roles that they were performing, and actually spent a lot of time collecting both qualitative and quantitative data to look at how employees actually collaborate, how they spend time with one another, and in the types of roles that they perform. So very quickly, we realized that there were two very important findings that sort of came through. One is there is a clear need to address the diverse needs of our employees, particularly for those who may not have conducive work environments at their homes or their remote locations. That was one very key finding, and it was actually something which we honestly did not realize. It's very easy to assume that all remote work environments are conducive. So that's one that came through. The second is there are different use cases that emerge for us depending on the role you perform, where you actually need in-person interactions. As an example, when a new employee joins a team, a new leader gets assimilated into a team, there is a particular go-to-market strategy which requires rapid brainstorming. These are different use cases that emerge for us. So we actually, after a lot of thought process, we emerged with, again, a hybrid way of working, where we said, depending on the role you perform in the company, outside of supply chain, of course, you can come into office 2 to 3 days a week, and the remainder you can continue to work from your remote location. And this became the kind of thought process we employed as we came back into office. And we allowed a gradual sort of transition from a day a week to 2 days a week and so forth, in order for employees to also sort of gain the muscle of even coming back into work. Because for 2 years, people hadn't come back into work at all. So these are some of the strategies we employed, and the hybrid way is the
Very
way
nice. So nice of you to have given some more kind of flavor to the whole discussion and brought in some interesting aspects, so that we don't lose them. Let me allude to a few that caught my attention. One is that you have been very thoughtful about trying to understand what people need, what the organization needs. So you looked at roles, you looked at tasks, and you looked at people's needs. So in one case, we we just heard that, we also look at clients and what they want. In your case, you look at what employees want, and all employees don't want the same. So some want to come back because their homes are not conducive, and some probably continue. And then it's further moderated by facts like the nature of work and the task at hand. So in the next level, again, we will probe this a little better to understand, people of the same task, then why would they come in 2 days a week or 3 days a week? So this is an interesting thing to sort of look for. So if I may go to you, Shanta, so that we give Krish the last word. What is your observation?
Now, a little different from, I think, the e-commerce or consulting, because pharma, ours is an essential services. When there is any crisis, pandemic, we rather need to increase our productivity more because we need to meet the requirements of patients. So even during the pandemic, 80% of our employees had to come to office every day at the labs. I'm talking about the R&D units, essentially. That is where, there was, this continued. And only at 20%, if I say that, of the corporate services or the other shared services, we allowed them during the peak of pandemic not to come to office. It was more because we were extremely conscious and worried about the health of, the lab people, the lab employees who are coming. So why bring in more risk in terms of bringing in others who are not needed? But slowly as things were getting better, there was a sense of unfair treatment coming, within the minds of people, that we came every day and they are, they're at home. And it's all a team, because there's a lot of cross-functional interactions between each of these teams. So then we slowly, what the pharma industry is doing is slowly bringing them also a hybrid structure for them, that, about 2 days from, working from office. But it's still, I would say, for the industry, it's a wait and watch. We are aligning to what the external requirements are also. Being sensitive about, what people need, want, ultimately, how do they really want their choice of work, and also what the reality is in terms of the major population that they need to come to office. So we are still a sort of a partly hybrid, but we are waiting and watching to see what best can be done for all.
Waiting and watching, yeah. Very interesting thing to be to what are you watching for? And that will determine what you will get to see, and that will determine what will you do. But you, I just to kind of pause quickly so that we don't lose it. You also made an interesting point that, apart from being an emergency service and being in the heart of, healthcare, you are requiring people to come. But you also said you probably were driven by the idea that it will be productive for people to come. So you referred to the word productivity. So there has been this great discussion in the world around that that remote work or work from home has actually increased productivity. That has been the view that kind of popularly come across. There is some data to support that, but that's also a very popular view. What would have happened if you, is it that your work just can't be done from home? Or is it that because it will be less productive to do from home that you insist that they all come?
No, just to clear it out, even the corporate services who were working from home did absolutely their work, in a very productive manner. But I'm talking about the R&D units where we have the discoveries and you have, experiments at labs. So this is a role that cannot be done from home. It has to be in the labs. It has to be in the workplace.
No, sure. So it's not productivity which is the real determinant. It is the nature of work that, like in case of Flipkart, Krishna talked about supply chain and saying that that's the type of work that you have to, it has a touch point and you have to be at the touch point. Similarly, perhaps your guys have to be in the lab to do the lab work. So I understand. So Sir Krish, what's your thought on this? What has happened in Infosys though?
Yeah. No, firstly, thank you and pleasure being here. Good to be with all of you here. I think, the IT industry especially has been one which has really taken to this remote working, with full gusto. With full gusto. I think if you look at it over the last 2 years, we had almost about 97% of our people working from home, and 2 or 3% were the very essential kind of people who had to come to, the physical office. But that 97 has now moved to about 95, 94, but still a lot of people are working from home. But there are 3 or 4 things that's something we've got to really look at. I think this is a very evolving kind of area, evolving both from what the company as companies kind of learning from it, also what people are experiencing. Yeah, and if I just look at it, I'm just taking a small example. The first quarter of the pandemic, let's say, around April to June of 2020, we had a huge uptick in our engagement. People were thrilled, though they are working, they were thrilled, and there was phenomenal all-time high engagement, and they were all completely charged. After a couple of quarters, it came down. The whole high of engagement came down, and over time, we felt that there were some kind of areas where people felt that longer hours, there is a little bit of more stress. While they had flexibility, they also felt there was a little bit of work stress also picking up. So, and now I think when you look at it, some people will say, listen, I want to come back. But some people will say, listen, I'm happy because I'm saving 2 hours of commute. Work is getting done. I'm getting that flexibility. Why should I come back? So there's a mixed kind of a thing. Second point is it's a kind of the what do you call the type of workforce that we have. We have a very young workforce, and I think almost about 70% of our employees are less than 4-5 years of, they're fresh from engineering colleges. And many of them are from towns which are other than the cities where we have offices. So if you look at it, almost about 60% of our people have gone to their hometowns across the country in 80 different towns. They're all over the country, and they're working, and therefore, which is kind of, created a lot of buzz within those, in a place like a Durgapur or an Asansol or a Ranchi or wherever it is. Now, while they're all there, they're working, things are going okay. Would they like to come back? Not so sure. They're thinking about it while we're feeling. Some of them are saying, listen, may not be now, but maybe over time. So therefore, again, it's a bit of a wait and watch, because they feel that currently there is a home ecosystem they're working with, but they're also thinking in the future about long-term careers, about what they want to do, and about being with the team, in the centers like a Pune or a Bangalore. So that's also in their mind. So they are thinking about it. So what I would say is, in the IT industry, this is evolving. Yeah? From the company's perspective, while productivity, which is mainly our delivery to our clients, has not suffered, there's always this thing about, are you having enough social connection? Is the identity with the organization strong enough? You also know that IT industry is seeing a huge talent demand, huge growth over the last 2 years. We're seeing high attrition. And there's also a feeling that, more remote you work, you may not be able to get as engaged with your team and your work as you could in a physical thing. Yeah? So those are all the kind of things that are being playing out. So on one hand, it is the personal needs of people, the need for flexibility and what they're finding. On the other hand, it is about their own interest also. How long will this go on? Is there any change? Some would like, some may not like to know the change, but also what is right as going forward. So I think we are all in this bit of a mid-transition. We are getting our leaders to come 2 or 3 days a week. Whoever is there in the cities, the campus is open, they come there. Like most of the corporate functions are there 3-4 days a week. So those are people who are coming. But I think we are watching over time. Maybe we'll see how it is. And this is the whole industry. And I think because our industry also has got many things, we've got to ensure that the schools are fully working, the daycare centers are working, the paying guests are all up. That's when, because we got huge number of people, therefore, I think people are watching.
The whole ecosystem must support you.
Yeah. So I would say it's a kind of as of now, I think we are happy where we are, but slowly there will be a thing. There are some group of people who would like to come. There are some people who would like flexibility. In then, I would believe that about 20-30% would like the flexibility and work remotely. There will be some who will come every day to office, and there'll be a mid 30-40% who will probably come 2-3 days a week. That's how we will probably end up over the next couple of quarters.
Yeah. So we'll hold our thoughts about how might the future unfold. But for now, one thing I was curious that, see, for all the other 3 speakers here, there was almost a near official position that we are now on a hybrid mode. But I didn't see that clearly from how you presented it. So is Infosys or IT industry clearly officially saying now we are in a hybrid mode and many of you have to come for a certain number of days a week? Is that where you have reached, or do you have
no? We are not. We are not mandating anybody. We are. Okay. We are conscious of the flexibility needs of our people, and there are many of them who would like that. So we are. As of now, we are saying, listen, let's continue as long as things are going well. We are keeping your needs paramount.
But would I be right, Sonali, Krishna, and Shanta, that in your case, it's not like that? It's almost kind of a mandate, or at least an official request that you should all come on certain days of the week. Yes or no?
I would say it's an attempt and it's a transition. I think, like Krish mentioned, it's very hard to mandate because there are people who appreciate the flexibility, who are in smaller towns and cities. They have the family ecosystem. They don't want to come to to Bangalore, Mumbai, or Gurgaon. The rents are high. All those ecosystem challenges. But yes, I would say in the last 2 months, we're getting closer to saying we strongly encourage you to come back at least a couple of days a week. So I would put it like that versus saying we are mandating it.
And Krishna, is it a mandate or is it?
It's again, like I said, it's more around a recommendation at this time between, like, depending on the kind of role you perform. And what we've seen so far, by the way, over the last month or two since we started to send out that communication, is that increasingly we're seeing people come back in. There are obviously a set of people who don't want to come back in as well. And they're also waiting and watching. But I think from that perspective, it's not a mandate as how we put it. We put it as, we encourage you, we recommend you to come, and depending on the role you perform, between 1 to 3 days a week. So, and we're seeing that getting picked up.
That view is clear, and the work itself needs people to be there. So I understand. But just to put a controversial idea here and then move on to the next section, is that, look, we don't like, in today's days and age, we don't like the word mandate. But what we do may be experienced by people as mandate. We may not use the word, but I say I strongly encourage you from a position of power. And I myself start coming to office every day, and I strongly encourage all of you to come for 2 days. It lands on the employee, as that is most desirable. Anything else would be career limiting. So we have to, I'm just saying that that's an interesting thing. So sometimes when we capture a trend between what is said and what is meant and what is experienced, there are some interesting nuances that we need to sort of understand, and we can't get the trend in any one of these dimensions. If I just went to tick box saying that which companies have gone for hybrid work, I may get one answer. Which girls are strongly encouraging hybrid work, I may get another answer. Which work companies are hesitating, I get a third answer. So there are interesting situations here. But what is important now, to move on to the next section, we have only 15 minutes more, is an important thing, So there are a number of considerations companies have towards moving to the new model. And in the new model, all of you are suggesting that there will be some people who might work remotely, and some people may have to come either for the reason that there is a nature of work demands that, or that social interactions are important for that work, and therefore they need to come, social capital, etc. And or the very nature of work is like that, whatever be the reason. So assuming that the trend is going to be hybrid, which means some people will come for certain time, and some people will always be at home. And these may not be mutually exclusive groups either, which means that those who are at home may come to the workplace, and those who are coming to the workplace may suddenly choose to be at home for longer periods of time. So it's the mix and choice which will make it hybrid. In that case, what do you think will be the consideration on which this decision will be taken? What will be the most important consideration for your organization, for your industry, on which the choice of the mix will be determined? If there's some conscious thought around it, it may not be one consideration, could be a few, but that's what I think we all need to know, so that it doesn't become the opinion of an individual or but is there any trend emerging towards, based on your surveys, based on your data, based on your experience, is there any reason why anybody in the audience, if he or she is running a company and they want to learn from you and answer the question, what should be the considerations that I must factor before I decide what mix of work model should I offer to my employees? If that question has to be answered, what would be your thought for that? Krishna.
Yeah, so I think I spoke about it briefly, right, when we were talking about how I think about the future of work from a Flipkart standpoint and broader e-commerce standpoint. I think first and foremost, there are employees that have special needs. So there are employees taking care of elderly at home. There are employees who have medical conditions. And notwithstanding the pandemic, there are challenges in terms of them coming into work on a daily basis. So would you want to look at those specific considerations as one particular dimension?
Yeah. Employee needs.
Employee needs. The second is the type of role they perform. And for this, I'll give an example. The one end of the spectrum for us is a supply chain person who's delivering packages to the customer. There's a customer touch point and the person has to deliver those packages. So they have to come into work. But say, let's take an example.
Till drones take over.
Yeah, till drones take over. And there are regulations in India permit delivery by drones.
Trying to add a little spice. Yeah.
But there's the other end within, let's take engineering as an example. There is a software engineer who's working on a specific project and requires a lot of deep work, deep thinking time. And it's more, the type of work suits itself to become a lot more solitary in nature because there's a lot of deep work. Now that person may not need to come in every day of the week. Now within engineering, there could be another person who's like an engineering manager or a product manager who has various other touch points with the business, touch points with the client, right? Touch points with other interfacing teams that they need to collaborate with. For this person, what we found is an ideal sweet spot is anywhere between 2 to 3 days a week to come in. So you look at the type of role they're performing in any job family that they are, and it could be divided further into not just at the engineering level. I gave an example of within engineering, 2 different examples. So look at the type of role they're performing, and that could be a very important second dimension that you want to look at. So these would be just 2 that at least I would want to share.
Thank you. Thank you. So being the type of work and employee needs. These are the 2 big drivers as to what will decide who will come. If I had time, I would probe more, and we'll take that offline, as to 2 to 3 is a big difference. It may be interesting to understand why would somebody do 2 days and why would somebody else do 3 days, because 1 day is 1 day and they can't be interchangeably used because it impacts life. So what would make companies decide whether it should be 2 days or it should be 3 days? What should be the consideration? But park that thought. I'm also using this more to get the audience engaged and start thinking about these issues. Sonali, what would be your considerations?
So very similar to what Krishna mentioned. I think when you look at consulting work, given its professional service, we need to look at what the client wants us to do. So we look at it in terms of 2 axes really. One is the need of the client for co-location. How much of co-location do they want? If the client themselves are remote, then the team can be remote as well. They don't need the team to be co-located. But the other axis would be team co-location. So if it is largely collaborative, effort which requires you to team with other members, then the need for co-location is higher. Whereas if it's more of an individual contributor role, some of the examples that Krishna mentioned, then you're more prone to be comfortable with letting them work from home versus coming to office. So very similar to what Krishna said, but the 2 axes of client and team co-location.
Co-location, yeah. Just to check this issue, just to be ruling out the possibility. Are you seeing the client requirements consistent in the sense, is there a case where the client works remotely but wants you to be in their location?
No, not really. So actually,
there is at least consistency aligned there.
Yes, it's
okay.
very aligned.
Very interesting. Good. So thank you. And Shanta, any thoughts from your side? And then I'll request Krish.
Yeah, again, it would be, very role-based. Like, for example, if it is our R&D employees who need to come every day, there also we are looking into how to make that also a little flexible in terms of staggered shifts. Even during that shifts, it could be specific people identifying specific hours of work, but definitely there should be some common hours because meetings would be taking place in those times. So that is what we are doing for the R&D based employees, and for roles which can be done, work from home is possible. there, what is very important is to look into certain aspects about, the flexibility in what, the employees are wanting, the empathy part of it, looking into, it's okay if you are running a few errands along with your work, as long as your work you're doing in time, and the hours that you've told that these hours I'll be available, you are 100% available. The authenticity, it's always important, to walk the walk with them and give them the very clear picture. And of course, the most important thing I think is the transparency in communications. It's very important to tell them, okay, this is what I can give, this is what I cannot give. Make that very clear. And I think with these basics there, if the inclusivity is there, I think, there's a lot that, it's then it's
no, sure.
accepted.
After you have decided that there would be some who would work from home, some who would come to office, or broadly this hybrid model is okay for some parts of the company, then number of the factors that you talk about become very important to operationalize that. So we will sort of also examine that. But the
and just to add,
is,
to add that I'm talking this in terms of the industry, because in the industry, if I see in pharma, there are some organizations who have asked people to come to office. But in a few pharma companies have actually allowed the work from home. The R&D, of course, with employees needs to come, which are role-based.
Yeah, wonderful. Krish, your thoughts on this as to what might be the considerations?
Well, I think not very different. I think they've all spoken the same thing. I think on one hand, it's about the job. What is the work that needs to be done? Some of them you need people on the ground, that's there. Some you are leaving, it's flexible, and therefore there you say, okay, number one, the employee's personal needs, do they want to come? What are their own personal needs for flexibility? So that's very important. Number two, I think from a company side, we also feel that if you come together, there is better connect within the team. Your project will get better. So therefore, there's also a need for the team to come together, and that we leave the team to decide, saying, you guys decide what is it. Sometimes it may be 1 day, 2 days, what works best for you guys to come together. So therefore, while there is the need of the job, there's a need of the personal thing of the employee, but there's also a need of the team for connecting, coming together, the social bond. I think that's something they've got to figure out. And I think we've got to, and that's variable. I think to your earlier question, why 2 day, why 3 day? I think that's a little bit of the flexibility left to the teams, and they feel 3 days is good for us because we got that kind of work and that is there, that's fine. If some feel they can do it in 2 days, that's fine. So I think we've got to be flexible. There's no hard and fast rule here, because we've got to ensure that this is an inclusive thing and it works well for everybody.
Absolutely. No, great point you're making. In fact, the more you say that we will leave it to the teams, that's exactly the section to which I wanted to take our discussion next. The big discussion that I'm reading about and watching in the industry is that who decides? Looks like there are a set of people called employers, leaders, CEOs, CXOs, SBU heads. These are the big, powerful people. It appears that they all want that people should come back to work in the office. And there are these employees who have gone to their hometowns, who have their own issues, and who would like to stay back. So there is this great divide between the employer and the employee. So just looking into the future, as this whole issue will emerge, and as we will shape the future of work, who do you think will make the decision? How will it actually shape? What will be the role of the so-called employer representatives versus the employees? And currently, one is seeing a divide. Anyone who wants to take this first?
Let me attempt that. I think.
Yes.
So, Chandra, I think you're kind of creating a kind of a divide. It is not that stark, in the sense that, see, it's been 2 years now, and people have been working with remote. Everyone, leaders, everybody is kind of ensured that people are able to work in a remote way, and that's how it is going. Yeah, I think the point is, after some time, you have to take decisions based on what people also want. There are some people who will say, listen, how long will this go on? There is a group of people who would like to come together. There are a group of people who have gone to their hometowns and say, I'm on a wait and watch approach. I'll see, how things go on. And they got some time to decide. There's also a thing about, what is good for the organization in the longer term? What is good for getting the team together? The what do you call, building the social capital. In a company like ours, if you look at it, with the high amount of people we hire every year. Last year alone, in the 1 year, we've had almost 100,000 people. And this 100,000 people have joined us, and they've not come and seen the offices. They're working remotely. And some of them want to come. It's not that they're saying, we want to come. Yeah. And therefore, I think it's a thing where we got to put both together. Yeah. I think it's not about employers say you should come. I don't think any employer or anybody is mandating that way, because they're also conscious that this is something we got to ensure. But they are also conscious about needs of the employees. We got to work through it in a way which is best for all. That's what I would say.
That's very progressive and forward-looking. But I wouldn't say that all employers are in similar position. We have seen internationally a lot of financial services company chiefs officially saying you better come, otherwise you might lose your job. So there are people who have taken stances, and employers seem to suggest that this is it.
But they've also reversed it. Some of them have reversed it also.
Some of them have reversed it when they saw that the resignation is continuing. Good. Krishna, you have a thought?
Yeah, I was actually just building on what Krish said, right? I don't want to think about it as a divide. And I'll tell you, at least from our experience, even with the leadership at Flipkart, I think a lot of it actually comes to having a dialogue, a continuous dialogue of sorts. And for us, actually, we've been heavily guided by data. So we're a very data-centric company at times. And so a lot of the leadership also gets guided by data. So once you actually start throwing up data, this is what employee preferences are. This is what their needs are, and this is what they're telling us. If we are able to actually converge on some sort of ground, which actually is a delicate balance, like Krish said, there is a larger organizational need as well. I mean, Krish talked about a huge number of people, obviously not the same at Flipkart, but still the fact that I would tell you, Professor, before the pandemic, the way Flipsters used to work is we would work together in rooms around problems, and literally somebody would just pick up a marker from the whiteboard and start drawing on the table. And our tables were write tables. We could write on the tables. And we would collaborate around the table. A lot of the new Flipsters who have joined us have never experienced the campus, have never actually come into teams. This is also a need, not just for the organization, actually maybe a need they themselves don't realize that they're missing. So it's this sort of middle ground that you need to figure out. What are the organizational needs? How do you convey employees' needs through data and other insights? And how do you sort of make sure that a dialogue takes place, between the two sort of actors here in the system?
It will, obviously, in most progressive companies, it will be a dialogue. We are a minute past the time that was allotted to me. So unfortunately, I'm not further talking, but just so that I leave you with one of my thoughts on this. I think there is an interesting framing issue here. We seem to have framed it as remote work versus office work. And therefore, some people are remembering the pros of working from office, and some people are remembering the cons of working from home. I guess there is a future where it's not one versus the other, but it is a blended future, and that there are merits in doing both, and that we do not see one is an inferior alternative to the other. And perhaps both the advances in technology and the experiential empirical evidence of what work is turning out to be will tell us that remote work is a viable alternative to office-based work in certain situations, if certain contingencies are addressed. And if the sense of it being a privilege is gone, we would have a greater ground for a dialogue than if it continues to be seen as a privilege that is being taken by some and not by others. So that's just one thought, but there are many other thoughts here. Thank you for all your interesting ideas. I'm sure the audience has deeply benefited. Suvarna, back to you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Starting with Sonali, we have a question for Bain. We have seen that women participation in labor force has gone down during the pandemic. how has Bain tried to improve retention or hiring of women in the company?
Sure. So one is it's a work in progress, Suvarna, and so it's not, I won't say that we have all the answers nailed, but I think couple of things. One is, just flexibility, I think has brought a tremendous opportunity to help women, who are either primary caregivers or, need to take a sabbatical either for motherhood or, for other reasons, they are able to participate in the workforce. So I think that's one very important benefit of remote work. The second is just, bringing back a lot of women who may have stopped working, and like just widening that funnel at the recruiting end is something that, we're trying to do, to see if there are people who would like to post their sabbaticals, look at coming into consulting and, taking on either flexible roles or full-time roles or roles that work with, their current life situation. So those two would be primarily what we are trying. Additionally, we have a program within Bain, which, is called Women at Bain, where we try to address a lot of the key challenges specifically related to sustainability and, different part-time models that one could look at within consulting to, kind of grow and get to partnership. So those are what our focus areas have been in the last 6 to 12 months.
Another question that we have is, how does remote work actually impact the marketplace? Could it potentially lead to Western companies hiring cheaper talent from the Indian population? And with people working remotely, is that causing a talent crunch for companies in India? This is open to everybody in the panel, including your Professor Sripada. So if any of you want to go ahead, let me know.
I will leave it to the panelists. Krish would be very much in a good position to answer this. This is not new. I mean, always the talent came from India.
Yeah.
Because remote work making it more
and it is not cheap. Yeah. So, Krish.
No, I think the point is right. See, what has happened is remote working has really, in a way, democratized work. Yeah, I think there's more work that can be done remotely, and that's good for countries like India, because that means more business can be done out of India. We can get more business from the US and get it done here. So that's good, and we're seeing that. We are seeing huge amount of growth in IT services. Also, many companies are setting up their, whatever. They've now realized that much more work can be done remotely. So they are investing a lot more. So therefore, in a way, it's good. I think overall, it's good for the industry. It's good for the talent, which is leading to a talent crunch. But it's a short-term supply and demand kind of an issue. Hopefully, the supply will catch up, in a year or so, and then it should really lead to growth for us. So I think remote working, I would say, is good overall, because it creates more opportunities, and and it's good for any company in India to really take hold of those opportunities.
Yeah, Shanta.
Shanta has a point on this.
Yeah,
it's in the pharma industry also. Major of these SaaS programmers, they are of course remote working. And there has been a lot of new organizations, MNCs, come into India who are already at the that stage of clinical trials. So there has, and this talent is restricted. It's not that too much of talent we have in India. It's a very specialized skill, and we do see quite an exodus. And that is where not only I think a lot of the pharma companies, most of them are facing this problem of the exodus and going into the MNC and these new shops which has come in. So we are losing talent.
Understood. Another question is regarding the neurodiverse community in India, or the population with attention deficit disorders. Has there been any policies in these companies that you work for that that we've tried to integrate these populations at least, or have there been policies and discussion for this group to be imbibed in the companies going forward? Again, a question for anyone in the panel.
more a practice question. So I know of companies which have conscious policies around really inviting people of neurodiversity background, autism and other things. It's a part of the overall diversity strategy. But I think I leave the practices for you to share. Anyone of you can share.
Let me just, I think we are doing it. I think it's more of, if I look at Infosys, it's quite well established in many of our other countries. For example, Infosys Australia, we've got a kind of thing with the association with disabilities, and neurodiverse is a big talent that we are hiring. We're also training them. That's the other thing. Even in India, we've worked with various organizations to see where it is, and there is a lot of neurodiverse has become more important now. In the past, it was a lot more focused on people with disabilities, but now we've also looked at neurodiverse, and I think that's an area we are working on. Yeah.
Great. The next question is for Krishna. How has your experience in company operations influenced the manner in which you formulate HR strategies?
So if I understand the question, it's you're talking about operations, right? The way the company actually, in our case, delivers products to customers. Is that the question in terms of?
Well, let me put it to you. I'll explain that to you. It's a question very personal to you. And it's a question which says that you have been in operations. Now you have become an HR leader. What is the difference? Why? What qualifies you to be in HR? What do you do about HR differently than what a career HR person would have done now that you have come from operations? I'm kind of elaborating on the intent behind the question. Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for clarifying. So operations in my parlance is e-cart, which is a big part of Flipkart supply chain. But I think for me, I've been on the engineering and product side for a couple of decades and close to 8 years in Flipkart prior to my HR role. I think the biggest thing that it's given me in terms of how I approach anything in HR is the design first thinking, the customer centricity that we employ when we build products. When we actually design policies, practices in HR, do we keep the employee at the center and design stuff around them, or do we think about the organization first and what needs to be driven as a policy towards employees? So it's kind of interestingly in HR, it's for me, it's keeping the employee at the center. I know it sounds commonsensical, but this is something that from a design thinking practice in HR, I found very powerful in my time.
Great. In the interest of time, we'll take one more question, and it's the fact that people are asking how transparent are company CEOs and leaders about the changes that are taking place. We've spoken about how a lot of the things that we're doing are in flux. It's evolving. Evolving seems to be a key term about how we are changing policies in our organizations to meet employees' demands for flexibility. But how transparent are company leaders, including HR leaders, being with these employees in the organization? And again, would love to hear from all of you on this topic. Can we start with Shanta in the pharma industry? How do we think it's going in SPARC?
See, one truth is earlier it was organization-centric, but the pandemic has really opened our eyes. It's now employee-centric. Management has also, senior leaders have also realized, and they realize it because ultimately it's human resources and their well-being is most important. So in the communications, as I said, to bring in inclusivity, you have to really be very clear about what you are able to give, what you're not able to give. So, and here at least in the pharma industries, through town halls and through various group discussions, the CEOs, the management has been very, very clear and transparent to tell them that, okay, if these are we need to come, we need to, because there is a manufacturing process after our innovations, after it goes to the manufacturing process, then vaccines are made, medicines are made. We need to go on to serve the humanity. And the other part is, okay, there are certain role specific where there is competition around, where they are allowing work from home. So we really need to look at the external factors too. And management has actually been very, very clear, transparent, candid about it. And that's why I think the acceptance has also till now been quite good among employees.
Great to hear. Any other nuanced opinion about this, or is that generally what the sentiment is across the three other organizations?
So see, let me add here, questions like what have been the CEOs, etc. I expect that there is a possibility of a generalized answer. There is nothing like all CEOs would be either transparent or all CEOs will not be transparent. And there is nothing between transparency and CEO. It's just often an individual choice. It is often a leadership behavior. So some CEOs in certain circumstances become transparent, some cannot. Is there anything in our environment which is compelling CEOs to be less transparent? The answer is they are also faced with as many dilemmas as all of us are. If transparency is clarity about what will happen next, then God only knows what will happen next. No human being knows. So that's the kind of uncertainty that everyone is facing. So to expect transparency as in predictable certainties itself may not be very fair in current times when it is so very volatile. But within that, are some CEOs more transparent than others? The answer is yes. And that's nothing to do with being CEO, it's to do with being the human being that they are. Okay? So we will leave it at that.
Yeah, that's a great note to end this on. It's the reality, and but we're all working towards the best. I want to thank the panel and our moderator for taking the time out for this enriching discussion today and providing very valuable insights, not just for the professionals in the Indian workforce, but for everybody around the globe who interacts with Indian companies. With this, we're concluding the panel, but audience, please hang back for the OTT panel that's coming up next on this link. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.